Good evening, children. During my last class, I had discussed about RH incompatibility during pregnancy, and we talked about erythroblastosis fetalis or the hemolytic jaundice or anemia. After that, we talked about carbon monoxide poisoning, followed by spleen and why is it called the graveyard of RBCs, and the entire process of clotting or coagulation of blood. First, we discussed what it is, what time it requires, and various clotting factors and the overall detailed stepwise working for clotting process to occur. There were 4 steps, children. Number 1, 2, 3 and 4. We stopped here last time. So today we'll continue with our new topic in the circulatory system. The topic is lymphatic system and lymph. To begin with, children, first I'd like to show you the lymphatic system of a human being. This is the lymphatic system, if you see. And the fluid that is the lymph here is the one that circulates in the system. And to understand this formation of lymph, we can imagine that this is comparable to plasma. Which plasma? The same plasma which is present in the blood. But here in this lymph, yes, the proteins are same as plasma, but they are in lesser quantity. Then the lymph flowing in this system also has lymphocytes which are concerned with the defense of our body. And also present are large molecules of fat. We call them as chylomicrons, and they are present in the lymph that is picked up from the intestines here, right? You can see the small intestine, the lacteals that is present in the villus, right? So through this, the fat molecules called chylomicrons, they are present in the lymph, right? And we call them as chyle. It is a milky white fluid. So let us start with this lymph, the composition and this formation. This is very simple and interesting to know how is it formed. So let's see, children, first the definition of lymph. It is the fluid that circulates in the lymphatic system. Composition of lymph, as I just now said, it is comparable to the blood plasma, same proteins but in lesser quantity. It contains lymphocytes and there are large molecules of fats called chylomicrons which are present in the lymph from intestine called as the chyle. Right? The lymph from intestine is called chyle and it is a milky white liquid. Now let's talk about how is this lymph formed. Just look at this simple diagram, children. This is, yes, a hypothetical one you have to form, though this is not into any book here, but just for you to understand, I have tried to simplify. Now let's see what happens. We know, children, that blood is flowing everywhere in our body, and the basis of supply is to supply oxygen and nutrients to every possible place. Let us suppose that these blue colored structures are our various tissue cells, right, of various organs, etc. Now blood is bringing food and oxygen. Let us write here, food and oxygen the blood is bringing, and it will convey to the cells regularly. Alright, now what happens is that the cells that are present here, we have already discussed RBCs, WBCs and the platelets, right? Most of the WBCs, they squeeze out through the blood capillaries along with the plasma. And see what I have crossed? RBCs, they do not come out, and platelets, they do not come out at all. Once again, so these are the cells, right? And when the blood is bringing oxygen and the food through the medium, right? So it is giving to the cells, you can see oxygen entering along with the nutrients and carbon dioxide is being removed. So this fluid, how it is formed around the cells or the tissues is nothing but the plasma that is squeezing out. See this red arrow, right? This 2 things I have written here. Number 1, plasma oozes out from the blood along with the WBCs or leukocytes. So what does not come out are RBCs and platelets. Now this fluid that is formed, the green colored fluid that you can see, is called tissue fluid. Yes, because it is bathing the tissues, right? We also call it as the intercellular. Inter means it is present between the cells, or extracellular, that is outside the cell. Once again, let us see what and how this happened. Blood bringing oxygen and food, and the various cells were there. Only plasma and leukocytes squeezed out and formed a fluid. We called it as the tissue fluid or interstitial fluid or extracellular fluid. Now what happens, children? This fluid, right? Yes, most of it will return back to the blood, right? That is the venules, that is the venous ends, because now blood has picked up carbon dioxide, the structure has picked up carbon dioxide and waste, so most of it will return back to the blood. But around 10% of this green colored liquid enters into a separate channel of capillaries and now forms what we call as lymph. Alright, so what is lymph, children? Nothing, but it is derived from the blood. See, first it squeezed out here into the tissue spaces and then went back carrying all the carbon dioxide, waste, etc. Around 90% of fluid goes back to blood, right? But 10% of it came into another channel, right? Returns to the new, we can say it enters the lymph capillaries as lymph. Now this lymph further will circulate the liquid to the blood system directly, that is to the subclavian vein. So let's see what are these labelings here. This is the lymph vessel. Now I hope you understand how it is formed. It is formed from these minute lymph capillaries, that is bringing the drained out liquid from the interstitial fluid only, right? And now it contains special cells for the defense. We call them lymphocytes. And at places later on which are swollen areas, what we call as lymph nodes, these are areas whenever the lymph passes through these areas, these nodes will trap the germs, right? So naturally this is going to protect us. And now finally the liquid will be transferring, the system will be transferring lymph back to the blood, because see, every time the fluid is oozing out, this pressure etc. should be maintained. So this naturally later on will be transferred to the circulatory system, right? So this is how we can say the lymph is formed, children. Just now we discussed what is lymph, composition and how it is formed. I hope you have understood, children. Moving further to the lymphatic system, what it is, we are going to study basically 4 important things. Lymphatic system, just now as we talked here, is a system of lymph vessels, nodes, thymus and spleen. Let's see here. This is spleen, children, a gland somewhere in the abdomen region. Over here, this is the upper part of abdomen, right? Thymus is somewhere in the upper thorax here, right? Anterior part of the thorax. Then we have lymph vessels. You can see all around the lymph vessels are running, right? Then the tonsils in the neck. So let's talk about 4 parts of the lymphatic system here. Lymphatic system, we'll talk under 4 headings. Lymph vessels, number 1. Lymph nodes, second. Then thymus, spleen, tonsils, pairs, patches, right? And further terms that I'll introduce. So let us see first what are lymphatic vessels. This is what I'm going to explain. This is a hypothetical, as I told you, children. So you're going to start with what is a lymph vessel. How it started, children? I told you it started as a lymph capillary. So lymphatic vessel starts as a lymph capillary between the tissue cells. You saw it, how it started between the tissue cells as the lymph capillary, and it is draining the lymph from the tissue fluid, right? And later on back to the bloodstream. Lymph is moved along the system very gradually because there is no central pumping station like a heart. So the movement is very slow, children, through the muscular activity of the lymph vessels, right? And walls present inside the vessels ensure that lymph flows in correct direction. So let's read here. Walls are present in these vessels to ensure the movement in correct direction, and they start between lymph tissue fluid and drain lymph from tissues all over body back to blood. Just now see here, the lymph vessels, they started here as lymph capillaries between the tissue cells here and draining the fluid first into the lymph vessels and then later on back to the blood later on. Alright, bloodstream. Coming to second, lymph nodes. Just now I told you these swollen areas, these will filter the germs and trap them and other foreign bodies in case they enter, and they're located on lymph vessels. Thymus. It's a large lymphoid gland present in the anterior part of thorax and lower part of neck. So it's a gland, children, right? And coming to spleen, just now I showed you here. This is the spleen, upper abdomen, right? So it's a large lymphoid organ located in the upper part of abdomen. Coming to tonsils, children, we have all heard of tonsils. These are lymphatic tissues located in throat, and they're supposed to protect against the infections. Usually children mostly suffer from the infection called as tonsillitis. So this is nothing but how they protect by getting infected themselves, but yet protecting the infection spread to whole body. A new term, children, we'll talk Peyer's patches. These are isolated nodules of lymphoid tissue in mucosa and submucosa of small intestine. That means the wall you're talking, the lining you're talking of the small intestine. So here in the small intestine area, the Peyer's patches are nodules of lymphoid tissues in the lining of small intestine, and the function is absorption and transportation of fat and fat-soluble vitamins. Now, before we move here, let me remind you here that our digestive system completes the entire process of digestion in small intestine. We know it already, right? So here when the food is absorbed, yes, directly, so this will be definitely taken up in the same process connected to the digestive system. So Peyer's patches, they help to absorb and transport fat and fat-soluble vitamins. Lacteals, again I showed you here. See this, lacteals, how they drain into the lymphatics. These are lymphatic capillaries present in the intestinal villi, right? Villus you have studied in class 9, the microscopic finger-like structures present in small intestine. So these lacteals, they absorb and transport fat and fat-soluble vitamins. So that means more or less the function of Peyer's patches and lacteals is exactly the same. Alright, now coming to the functions of lymph. Overall, the generalized function is body defense mechanism. Why? Because it filters the germs, inactivates the toxins or the poisons, produces WBCs and the antibodies against various antigens of the germs. Further, it carries nutrients and hormones. It acts as a cleansing filter and immune response center. It drains off excess fluids and proteins. Spleen removes old and worn out RBCs from the blood and returns iron to the blood for reuse in synthesizing hemoglobin. This we discussed last time, where we talked about spleen as the graveyard of RBCs and how the hemoglobin, it is going to be broken down and iron will be reused. Then the system also decomposes the unwanted molecules for disposal as waste products and absorbs and transports lipids and fat-soluble vitamins through the lacteal. Alright, so this lymphatic circulation, children, just now here as I told you, there is no pumping station like a heart. So this fluid that is circulating, the speed is very slow and sporadic, right? And how does the liquid move? It moves due to peristalsis, that is alternate contraction and relaxation of the neighboring muscles, smooth muscles, contraction of adjacent skeletal muscles and arterial pulsation. The fluid does not flow backward along the vessels because of presence of walls. So this walls prevent the backflow, and if excessive hydrostatic pressure develops within the lymph vessels, right, that is these vessels, if excess pressure develops, then a condition is seen, right? Some fluid leaks back into the interstitial space and contributes to the formation of edema. That is what I am trying to say is that suppose there is a higher pressure here. So the fluid which is entering here will be moving back into the interstitial space here, and naturally a condition develops what we call as a swelling or an edema. Alright, so this completes the lymphatic system. Once again, please see this, what I have started today. What is the lymph? Composition we did here. Alright, then how this hypothetically I told you how is lymph formed. Starting from blood, moving to the interstitial fluid or the tissue fluid what we call, and then the 10% of it draining into lymph vessels forming the liquid called lymph. Right. Then various parts of the lymphatic system, children. We discussed lymph vessels, lymph nodes, thymus, spleen, tonsils, Peyer's patches, lacteals, and the functions of lymph. So I hope you've understood, children. Here. Now we move to